This is Wake Up and Lead, a daily podcast where ambitious young professionals learn to lead themselves. I'm your host, Hampton Dorch, and today I've got somebody who has been on this show before, and I've actually quoted them probably 1,000 times based on one thing that they said, and I can tell you what that is in a minute, but Alicia Howson, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Hampton. Happy to be here.
So, my job at Wild Spark, we do leadership development. And I feel like one of the biggest problems we're solving is you've got a manager in a role that probably got there because they've been at the company a long time, or they're really good at the skill. And the analogy that you used to share that was that's like asking the star quarterback to become head coach and they don't necessarily transfer. And that quote alone has probably made me a lot of money. So thank you for sharing that, because that was a great way to put it.
I'll send you my Venmo after this. Just cut me my commission. We'll be good to go.
Okay, perfect. So Alicia has watched this podcast from early on and seen how I have gotten a little more structure and framework around it. And we're talking about these different F's: faith, family, fitness, fellowship, and future. And I feel like I could ask Alicia about all of them. But the one that I want to start with, and where we'll probably spend a lot of the time, is this future section. Alicia herself has had a couple different key roles within organizations, and one organization with which she got promoted, I don't even know how many times. And I think that through that and other things, you've learned what does it look like to add value in your organization and crush it where you are, and then add value, solve problems, and move on to the next role. So I may just even start with that as we're talking to, let's call it ambitious young professionals. I'm not going to put an age limit there, but somebody that says, hey, I've got this job or I'm working on this thing and I want to get better. Maybe talk a little bit about your experience from just getting promoted multiple times within this company. Like, how did that happen? Why did that happen? What are some of the things you were doing to stand out? I want to hear about it.
Yeah, so I would say a couple things that really kind of spurred into my promotions were number one, probably communication. That is like the cheesiest answer ever. So I'll come back to it in a minute because it's overused. But ultimately, the number one thing is to crush the role that you're in. You need to be doing that role better than anyone has ever done it, and definitely at your best and biggest capacity. The reason for that essentially is what I typically say to people is if you are so focused on your future and what that might look like and all these different roles and opportunities and things like that and where you're going, if you're too focused on that, you're going to trip over your current job and you're going to look at it like it's in your way, when really it is the literal stepping stone to whatever future you might want. And so for me, I always wanted to make it a no-brainer from that I would get promoted or that I would get more responsibility, things like that. So I personally love to solve problems. And so in that company that you spoke of that I got promoted a few times, what the reward for solving problems is that I got bigger and bigger problems in the business to solve. So for me, it was like a kid in a candy store. So, when my, founder or co-founder would come to me and say, hey, thank you so much for, your hard work on this, this, and this. We have this other problem over here. We want you to go solve that too. And that was just like music to my ears. Let me solve the problems. But they would have never come to me, all of those times if I wasn't crushing what I was already doing. And so ultimately, when you're thinking about whatever role that you're in the future that you want, you don't get to have a future if you don't crush your present. So you have to do that as good as you can possibly do. And honestly, your future will probably write itself as long as you do that first, right? That's what opens doors. That's what starts conversations, all of those things. And then I would say the second thing, I'll go back to my cheesy line about communication. No one ever didn't get promoted because they communicated too much. There's a couple double negatives there. Sorry. But my point is, there's no such thing as over communication. So my goal always has been and still is to this day. I want to give people information, updates, solutions to problems, all of those things almost before they even ask for them, almost before they even know that they need this information, right? I wanted to do their thinking for them. And good night. When you do your boss's thinking for them, you'll never go hungry. You will constantly have, more and more problems to solve, and more roles to fill, and, just more steps to take on that ladder if that's what you're after.
Doing your boss's thinking for them. Yeah, one of the things we talked about before, and this is one of the things I've learned earlier on and even have to remind myself of now. I think there's a lot of people in the workforce in the world that are just really, really good at pointing out problems or issues or challenges that they see. I think anybody can do that.
Sure.
Anybody can actually sit on their couch and watch a football game and say that the coach made a bad call. But it's like,
Of course.
okay, you get on there in the middle of the pressure and all that, and you actually
Yeah.
make the call. So where I'm getting at is we have a lot of problem bringer uppers, but not a lot of like solution bringers.
Sure.
And so I hear you say that that was really the key, one of
Yeah.
the main keys to unlocking that next step, solving some of your boss's problems for them. Is that what I hear you saying?
Absolutely. So the phrase that I use is I say, don't just be a problem seer, be a problem solver. So
Mm.
don't just be someone who only sees them and that's all you bring ever to your boss. So I've used a framework in the past. It's PESO, PESO. And basically, if you're wondering, how do I even do this or how do I go about this? You basically bring a problem to the boss. So that's the P. You explain the effect, meaning why does this even matter? And don't assume that they actually know because not all bosses are in the weeds on all the things. So they might not even understand why it's a problem. The S is solution. So here's my proposed solution that I think we should do. And then once you get approval on that solution and then you go execute the solution, then you bring the O, which is the outcome. Or they might ask you before you do the solution, what outcome are you hoping for? And then you get to paint that picture as well. But it's basically those four things. So if you're just gonna be like, hey, here's a problem, I mean, you're gonna stay at your compensation level as long as you keep expecting someone else to solve it. If you want a promotion and if you want that next job, that next role, that next pay raise tier, something like that, you need to be the one to solve it. And if you do that, the rest of it will come naturally. And if it doesn't come naturally where you currently are, that's okay. It could come naturally somewhere else because you're developing the discipline. So once you become a person that this is how you operate at work, it will open doors for you either where you are or somewhere else.
Mm. I love peso. You taught that to me over a year ago. And as I'm thinking back, I'm looking at these levels. So you got the problem. I think, a middle schooler could point out problems.
Mm-hmm.
Then you've got the effect, why it matters. So being able to sell the issue, which I think way less people can do, but still a lot of people can say, here's a problem, here's why it matters. But
Mm-hmm.
still what you're doing is you're looking at your boss and they're going, okay, thank you for, bringing this to light. I either already know about that or great, you just dumped another problem on my desk. I appreciate you bringing it to me, but you just gave me more to do. I'm not busy at all. But then very few people probably come up with one, two, if not three solutions and kind of give their boss like, hey, what do you think is direction here? And then I think even fewer probably get that direction and say, okay, I'm going to go do it and then report back to you. I can't imagine doing that consistently for a long period of time and not finding the success that you want to in your career, honestly.
Couldn't agree more. I mean, I'm living proof of it. I literally, I would say that is probably one of the top three things that has 100% contributed to any success I've had.
Yeah. Was there ever a time that you were just a problem seer, or have you always just been, is it part of your wiring to want to solve problems? How did you learn to
Yeah.
act like this?
Yeah. Great question. I think it's both. I think there's some nature and some nurture there. So I do think it's part of my natural wiring. I'll thank my dad for that. But I also would say that very early, I mean, I'm talking my very first kind of corporate job, I would say I was more of a seer and I didn't know what the solution should be because I didn't really know how to think yet. And so when I would bring those problems to my boss at the time, and she would sit there and she would think about what to do. And I very early candidly asked her, I said, would you mind doing your thinking out loud so that I can learn what you're working through to get to the solution? I didn't just want her to give me the solution. I wanted to know how she got there so that next time I could use the way she was thinking so that I could get to the solution before I even brought something to her. So that was something I asked of her very directly and specifically, and I told her why, because I didn't want her to be my decision making paradigm. I wanted to develop the skill myself to figure out how do I think about the business or solutions or things like that. And then, so over time, so gratefully, she was happy to think out loud for me, because again, I've learned if you can think for your boss, they really like that. And it's great for both of you. So when I started to learn how she was thinking, then the next time I could bring a problem and I might be able to bring maybe 3 solutions, and then over time, I would, and with her specifically, over time, I would bring her a problem and I narrowed the solution specifically. She at that point would not even think. She would go, great, go do it. She didn't, because I had built the muscle of, because I had problem, effect, solution, outcome. And so, because I'd done that so many times, when I brought something to her, because I would always bring the outcomes back. So when I would start bringing problems and solutions, she just literally would not think, great, go do it. And to me, it was like, it was trust, but it was because I had to prove that to her, right? I had to earn that over and over and over and over. And I was happy to do it because it was making me better in the process. So, that's why I think that was the company that I had several promotions in. I think it's because I developed the discipline and the muscle, and she recognized it, right? So it was her being a great leader as well.
I love the process of you learning that right there. And, as I have friends and peers that have, managers and bosses, that think about it this way, like your manager might have a team of a couple of different people, and part of their job, if they're doing it well, is, advocating for you, leading you well, equipping you to do good in your job. And a lot of times that takes up a lot of time, energy, effort. It's very draining. You've talked a lot about being like a middle manager. That's probably the hardest job there is, because you're leading in all different directions. And so what does it look like to be someone that your boss doesn't have to worry about?
Yep.
It's like if when they think about you, if they have a one-on-one meeting with you and they know, okay, in this one-on-one, instead of having to constantly give constructive feedback and handle these conflicts, what if it's just an ideation session where they're coming to me saying, hey, we've got these problems. Like, here's some of the ways I think I can help. And maybe they're a little bit behind in their career, maybe don't have as much maturity or business knowledge, and you have to like guide and direct. But I can only imagine as a manager, that's a lot more fun to have somebody like that on your team. And so the quicker that like we can learn to be that person for our manager, when they look at you, they think of you as less of a burden and probably more of an asset. And I imagine that leads to where you want to go much faster.
Totally. And I would also say too, if there's not a clear career path in whatever company you're at currently, don't assume that this doesn't matter. And the reason I say that is, at that company specifically, almost every time I got promoted, it was into a brand new role that had never existed before. So for me, it would have been easy to go, well, I don't really know how to get, I don't really know what my next role would even be here. So almost why even try? Because I'm going to have to leave to, get a next step. I would call BS on that mindset and say, like, you're responsible for your growth and development, and it could create a role within the company that you're currently at. It's literally happened to me 6 times, I think, if I'm counting right, that it was a brand new role out of created because of the needs in the business and what problems we were able to solve. And, to your point, the ideation of like, well, what if we did it this way? What if we took careers this way? What if we pathed this way? So I would also, if it's not clear what the next step is, it doesn't mean there isn't one. It just means like develop the muscle, put in the time, do the work. And an opportunity, I'm betting probably a lot of money is gonna come up.
Yeah. I was actually going to ask a little bit about that, because one of the things I've been talking a lot about and have been given a lot of advice around this in my own life is, as young professionals, if you will, a lot of what we're trying to do is think, okay, what's next in the next like 5 to 10 years? What am I working towards? And, if you're at a giant corporation, there probably is this ladder that's very clear in front of you that you can climb. If you're at more of a startup environment, like, part of your experience, part of mine, it's like there may not be a clear cut path, but they might be able to create a role. But I guess in your experience or people you've experienced in conversations, what about the person where it's pretty clear that there's not much ahead, like no matter what? Or I guess part of what I'm trying to ask here is like, at some level, it's great if you can solve problems and be where your feet are and absolutely crush your role. But if you can develop that skill, you're probably going to be valued anywhere you choose to go. So like in the roles that you've had and the people that like you've worked with, what kind of advice are you giving them as far as thinking, crushing their own role while also kind of thinking about the direction they're going and like that next step?
Yeah. So the question I like to ask when it comes to that is, if you're going to wake up on a Monday morning and give 40 hours of your life to something for professionally, what are the types of activities you want to be doing? So when you look at your to-do list or your calendar, it's like, what do you want your week to be filled with? What types of things? Because I think early in my career, I was trying to figure out what lane I was supposed to be in. Do I go marketing? Do I go sales? Do I go operations, client success, HR? There's all these lanes in business, right? And I think it took me too long to figure myself out because I was trying to fit in a box. So when I worked at a startup and I got to work in all these different pieces of the business, I found the common patterns, which for me is solving problems, building processes, and helping people. Those are my things. But I learned that through working in different pieces of the business. And what did I love when I worked in RevOps? What did I love when I was an account executive? What did I love in client success, in HR, in ops, all of those things? And for me, that's ultimately how I figured out what I really like to do is build processes that solve problems that help people, which sounds very pithy now, but it was a hard won realization about myself. So I would encourage anyone who's wondering, well, how do I figure out what's next? Figure out what you like to do. How do you like your time to be filled? So for example, I talked to someone this week. She's been interviewing for marketing roles for like 3 months and it wasn't clicking. I interviewed her for a marketing role and I'm like, hey, if I could just coach you for a minute, you are an operations brain. Like you are an ops person. Like if I were looking for an operations person right now, I would be wanting to talk to you, not really the marketing role that we're having this conversation about. So we kind of took the interview in a totally different direction. And everything about that then clicked for her because she goes, that is why these roles are not clicking because I've been looking for the wrong thing just because I was in a marketing lane. I'm like, you can still be in the marketing lane, but you can be in marketing ops. Right. And so I think when I got down to how she likes to spend her time and the things she likes to do at work, they were all very operational things and not necessarily lead driving things, which is the essence of marketing at the end of the day. Right. So I think it's asking that question. And then it could be looking for roles that are in that lane. But again, something that it doesn't have to be so cookie cutter. It's just, how do you want to spend your time? What's the kind of activity you like to do? And then go find a role that fits that, as opposed to the other way around. Let me go find a role that I think I'll like. Start with what you think you'll like, and then go figure out what words does that translate to in the business world. I don't know if that makes sense.
No, it definitely makes sense. And one of the things, and I know that everybody can't just find a startup, but at the same time, I would love for my peers to find an organization that's fast paced with lots of different opportunities. I mean, that's what you did, and you
Yes.
did everything, and that's how you
Yep.
learned what you wanted to do. I think a lot of organizations, it's like, here's kind of the path, and this is what you do. And why would you narrow yourself down so quickly when you're still young? Like, we don't know what we want to do. So I think that's really good advice.
1,000,000%. I can tell you the number one book that helped me with this that I would recommend to everyone young in their career. It's a book called Range by, I think it's Daniel Epstein or David Epstein. Sorry, author of that amazing book that I can't remember your first name. That book is so stinking good. And I'll give you two quick things from it. The first one is that the line that I have, to your point, I've said this line probably 1,000 times since I've read the book, which is, you learn only who you are by living and not before. So it's wasteful of time and energy right now if you're 22 or 25 or 31 or whatever young in your career means to you. It's wasteful of time and energy to try and plan the rest of your life and the rest of your career. The book would say, and now I have adopted this mindset in my own life, test and learn, test and learn, test and learn. And a startup environment is a phenomenal place to test and learn. That's my number one piece of advice to everybody young in their career. Like, get in at a startup, even if it's not a lot of money, just figure out, like, cut back your expenses, because the experience, I feel like I had 10 years of business experience crammed into my first 4 years at a startup. And that's like, it's not hyperbole. That is really how it felt. It was so much work and so many things. And it was so much fun. And I learned so much. And then, so that book suggests taking a test and learn approach, just, I would say, to your career, but also to your life. But
Mm.
it's really fruitful because almost all of your decisions are reversible, except for kids and tattoos. Those are a lot harder to reverse. So everything else, though, is reversible. So don't get so hung up on, is this the right step? Is this the right move? Do I want to be with this company forever? It's just test and learn. Just know that, hey, I'm just going to try this out. Not in a flaky way, but just in a, hey, if I'm only at this company for 2 years, if I only do this role for 18 months, or whatever. It's just having that openness instead of feeling like you're pigeonholing yourself down a particular path. You can always change your mind.
Yeah. And I think, with testing and learning, that's a great principle right there. It doesn't mean just try the most completely random things. Like, most of us have at least some self-awareness and some interest in what we want to do. So find like that broader subset of things that you might be interested in, and then test and learn there. It's like the amount of like uber successful people that I meet that are in their later 30s, 40s, 50s. They're like, oh, in my 20s and beyond, I did a little bit of this, a little bit of that. It's like, so I think a lot of times there's this pressure to kind of have it all figured out right now. And you're not going to know until you test and learn, which I think is really encouraging. So over the last year and a half, I think something has changed in your life from a fitness standpoint. That's one of the things we talk about here. You mentioned you maybe crushed some limiting beliefs. What are we talking about here? What happened?
Yeah. So the running joke in all of my circles is that I eat like a trucker and I don't go to the gym. And so everybody makes a big deal about it. They think I eat cheeseburgers and French fries and soda and I am a child. And so they always joke, I eat like a trucker. And then I just have this, I'm going to call it an identity, because I didn't mean for it to be that, but I would just say, I don't go to the gym. Like, I don't work out. If you want to like go play sports, I'm there all day, every day, every day. I want to do all the sports. That's super fun. So I love being active. I just don't like going to the gym. And a little over a year ago, back to the book Range, I've taken this test and learn approach across my whole life. And so one of the things I did was, I'm like, you know what? I'm going to test going to the gym. I have said for several decades now, I'm not somebody, I don't work out. I don't like working out, whatever. And if you just say something about yourself enough times, you believe it. Like, it's really kind of shocking how little we realize like our minds control our actions. I mean, we all know that from like a surface level, but when you really think about it, I just sat down one day and I'm like, well, why can't I be somebody that goes to the gym? Right. And so this sounds so bizarre, especially anyone who goes to the gym. They're like, really, you're really making a big deal about this. But it was a big deal because for me, it was some belief I had put on myself of, I'm not someone who does that. So I decided, okay, I'm going to go to the gym 5 to 6 days a week for 75 days. And I think this was actually like I unlocked a key for myself of any sort of life change or test or anything you want to do. And the reason for that is because when I made the decision to do it for 75 days, I never got to question the decision during those 75 days. There is no, oh, I don't feel like going to the gym today. Do I go? No, like, decision made. I'm going for 5 to 6 days a week for 75 days. And so that whole decision fatigue was gone because I didn't make the decision. I like to go around lunchtime. So it's like, all right, lunchtime, go to the gym. Like, this is who I am for this season. And I got to day 75 and I'm like, this really isn't that bad. Like, I don't dread it. It doesn't bother me. Like, obviously I feel great about it. I wouldn't say I'm some like fitness guru or like super buff, clearly, or anything like that. But my point was, I broke that limiting belief about myself that I'm not somebody who works out. Like, it's just not who I am. And now I'm like, well, why not? What if you sleep better? What if you eat better? What if you have more energy? All of these things. What if you, live longer? This fitness is the long game. It's not just the short game of, what you see in the mirror. It's the long game of life and playing with my kids and my grandkids, all of those things. So it sounds so dumb, but literally, to give you perspective, I called a friend of mine one time and I'm like, hey, or we were talking about something and I said something about, I'm going to the gym. And he said, are you going to try to buy the gym? Like he thought he was trying to buy a gym before he thought I was going to work out. That's how out of character it was for me. And
Oh, wow.
so I've just totally broken the belief. So now I am actually in like 5 days, it will have been a year. I just never quit. I just never quit. And
Wow.
it's been awesome just to break the belief about myself. Right.
Hmm.
For me, it was fitness. And so, I've obviously gotten better at it, things like that. It was so awkward in the beginning. So anybody out there like feels weird about going to the gym, I feel you. It's awkward. You don't know what you're doing. But it was so encouraging to me. And so now I'm like, well, what other beliefs do I have about myself that I probably need to go break or challenge? And so I took that test and learn approach of, okay, 75 days, let's just test it and just see how it goes. And I genuinely think I have probably added years and years onto my life just by breaking that belief and taking a test and learn approach to it.
That's amazing. I mean, it's making me think about the book, Mindset, having a growth mindset as opposed to a fixed one. And I had that same story with um, college, school growing up. I always said, school's not for me. I just do enough to get by. I'll be in sales one day. And here I am kind of doing that. But the limiting belief there was that I don't want to cast this on you because maybe it wasn't the same, but for me, I felt like it was a lot of pride. It was, I know that like naturally I may not have just the absolute highest IQ, and not that I'm unintelligent, but in my mind I was like, even if I try really, really hard, I know I won't be the smartest and I want to be the best. So therefore I'm just going to go in the opposite direction, make an excuse, and then almost like be like, yeah, but I'm still going to figure out my life and my career. I don't need that. But it was really like masking some level of insecurity. I'm not saying that's you, but I feel like that was kind of my situation like that.
Yeah, it's crazy how we just put these things on ourselves and you don't even realize that you're doing it sometimes, but then it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Then you just start to see confirmation bias everywhere of this belief, that you've put on yourself. And I see Atomic Habits, behind you. That was one of the books that talks about every decision you make is a vote for the identity that you want to have. And when you wake up and go to the gym, that's a vote for, who you want to be or whatever, whatever you're trying to do. But for me, I think the secret was I'm not trying to change my identity to be someone who goes to the gym initially. All it was is let me do this test and see what happens. And having that open mindedness and not having to feel like I have to build Rome in a day, or I have to change who I think when we try to change something so stark about ourselves, positive or negative, we feel like we fail a lot because you can't build Rome in a day. So it wasn't about that.
Mm-hmm.
It was just test and learn. Just test it for 75 days. And to me, that was, I think, the secret of the success there is because I took all the pressure off of trying to change who I am. It was just a
Yeah.
test, and then we'll see what happens. Turned out to be awesome.
Mm. Yeah. Wow. That's powerful. A lot to learn there. Well, as we're wrapping up, I know you're also a mom, a great mom. And one of the things that you've done well is have like certain boundaries and expectation settings in place. And so I know of like one of the things that you have blocked off on your calendar. I don't know, as we're wrapping up, what kind of boundaries or expectations have you set for yourself to make sure that you don't let family fall by the wayside?
Yeah, I think I actually am looking at a sign behind my computer right now that I've hung in my office, and it says the most important work you will ever do is within the walls of your home.
Mm.
And I have it sitting behind my laptop on purpose so that when I am working, I always remember that. And so when I get to a certain time of day, I'm like, I just need to shut it down. These problems will still be here tomorrow, but my kids are downstairs, waiting for me or something like that. And so ultimately, it's, the cliche saying of, family first and, all of that stuff. It's just all good and well until you actually do it. So I block 15 minutes on my calendar every single day to go get my children off the bus. It is a non negotiable. It didn't used to be, right? Early in my career, I would just work over that. I would let meetings push it. I would be on the phone while I'm at the bus stop and all of those things. And I just, had to wake up one day and say, this is not the mom you want to be. Like, you're better than this and your kids deserve more than that. And so it's just a matter of having the discipline and then putting those, I hung that sign in my office. I blocked the time on my calendar, all of those things to just, for me to know that I'm prioritizing what matters. And honestly, other people are not going to be as upset as you think they might be.
Yeah. Yeah. You're right. I think we have to be honest with ourselves and understand that we're probably not as important as we think that we are.
Yep.
So yeah, that's encouraging to hear. And as a new dad, definitely taking notes from you there. Not to be cheesy, but you did say I kind of had to wake up, and we do know the title of this podcast. You know how I like to end this. I think a lot of times it's like we can coast or drift through our life, be asleep at the wheel of our own life without really thinking intentionally about it. And so that's part of why I'm calling this Wake Up and Lead, So you know how we're going to end this. Are you ready?
I'm ready
All right. It's time for you and me
to wake up and lead.